Today, we are reviewing a short, deeply personal reflection about the emotional resonance and healing journey associated with the DHT version of the song Listen to Your Heart.
And jumping straight into our first point, integrating specific lyrical analysis directly into the personal narrative will significantly elevate the emotional resonance of the piece.
Right, because right now, when we look closely at the submitted draft, there's a really distinct physical and thematic separation occurring on the page. You have the author's personal narrative functioning in one space, and then the lyrics, which are provided under a separate section titled The Internal Compass of Love, they're just sitting entirely isolated in another space.
Yeah, they're completely walled off from each other. Exact. And the weakness here is that the reflection treats the song's lyrics as a completely detached entity. The material notes that the melody by the band DHT is beautiful and that during a specific period, it caused the author to cry because they were in an emotional and mental period that wasn't the best in the whole world. But it fails to anchor those intensely personal feelings to the actual text of the song.
So the reader is basically told that the song is moving, but they aren't shown how the words actually interacted with the author's pain.
You nailed it. It's a classic hurdle in personal essays that deal with external media. When you tell a reader, this song made me cry, the reader understands the fact of your sadness logically.
But they don't feel it.
Right. They don't feel the texture of it emotionally. They remain an outside observer, just kind of looking at your grief through a window. So the suggestion to fix this weakness is to actively weave specific lines from the lyrics directly into the personal anecdotes. You must use the lyrics as the emotional scaffolding for the journey.
But wait, let me push back slightly on that. Is there a risk that relying too heavily on quoting lyrics might turn this into like an analytical music review rather than a personal essay? We don't want to dilute the author's own voice, right?
Oh, for sure. That is the exact trap to avoid. It's a very valid concern. If you just drop block quotes into the text and start analyzing the rhyme scheme or the vocal performance, you've written an academic paper. We don't want a dissection of a 2000s dance track.
Right, we want a personal reflection.
Exactly. So the solution is to fundamentally reframe how we view the lyrics within the context of the essay. We aren't treating them as academic citation. We are treating them as emotional mirror. You don't pause your essay to analyze the lyric. You allow the lyric to seamlessly finish your own thought.
Oh, I like that. Let's make that tangible with some concrete examples. So the author could take a specific lyric, like "Your little piece of heaven turns too dark," and use that exact phrasing to introduce the not the best emotional and mental period mentioned in the text.
Yes, precisely. Instead of a really vague summary of feeling down, that lyric becomes the actual doorway into describing what that darkness looked like in their daily life.
Or, alternatively, building on that inability to communicate pain, they could use the lyric, "And there are voices that want to be heard. So much to mention, but you can't find the words." They could use that to explain exactly why the DHT melody specifically triggered tears when they couldn't articulate their own pain.
Yeah, because perhaps the song was speaking for them when they were completely devoid of the capacity to articulate their own internal state. The lyric steps in to do the heavy lifting when the author's own voice failed. And honestly, that is the core mechanism of why we connect to music, The lyric physicalizes the grief on the page.
It's like how we listen to music when we're sad. We aren't just hearing the singer, we're actively projecting our own circumstances onto their words.
Exact. And the author certainly doesn't have to use those specific lines. Those are just a couple of examples out of many possibilities within the song. The objective is simply to ensure the lyrical text physically touches and interacts with the personal narrative.
Well, speaking of that narrative, once we've established the depth of the pain, we need to talk about where the story goes next. Building causally from that previous point, exploring the transition from crying to no longer crying, will provide a much stronger, more satisfying emotional resolution for the reader.
Right, because once the lyrics are used to establish that initial pain, the critique really has to address how the piece resolves it. And the weakness currently is that the reflection ends incredibly abruptly.
Yeah, it really does.
It just simply states that, after a few years of listening to the song, the tears just stopped coming. It leaves a massive, gaping hole in the narrative arc.
It feels like a movie that skips the entire third act. We are shown the intense struggle at the very beginning, and then suddenly we cut to the peaceful aftermath. But we are deprived of seeing the actual climax or the journey of recovery.
That is a much more accurate way to look at it than expecting a sudden magical fix. I mean, the so what of the entire piece is missing because the reader doesn't know why or how this healing occurred. It leaves the conclusion feeling a bit hollow.
Right. When a reader invests in an author's vulnerability, there is an implicit psychological contract there.
Yes, exactly. By inviting the reader into your trauma, you owe them the mechanics of your survival. If you teleport them to the healed state without showing the hard work of the journey, they feel cheated out of the catharsis. Humans read stories about pain to understand how to survive it.
So the suggestion here is pretty clear, right? Expand on the passage of time and the shift in the author's internal state. The author needs to clarify the relationship between the song and their healing process over those intervening years.
Yeah, we need to see the evolution, not just the end point. So for some concrete examples of how to achieve this expansion, the author could describe what the song represents to them today versus what it represented during the dark period.
Oh, I see. For instance, they could contrast the past feeling of like, nothing is what it seems, with the present reality where the tears have stopped.
Exactly. Has the meaning of the song inverted? Did the song act as a literal catalyst for the healing? Or did the author do the hard work of healing completely independently, and as a result of that independent growth, changed how they hear the plea to listen to your heart before you tell him goodbye?
We basically need the current status of the song in their emotional landscape. Is this melody now a scar that reminds them of the past? Is it a victory anthem? Or is it just, a peaceful memory that's lost its emotional charge?
Answering those questions completes the narrative arc. And again, these are just a few potential avenues. The author doesn't need to write a 10-page dissertation on their psychological recovery, but they do need to fill that third act gap.
Right. It's really an issue of pacing, because when you compress years of complex emotional processing into a single sentence like, after a few years, the tears stopped, you rob the story of its natural rhythm.
Yeah, the reader needs to feel time passing. Even a single, well-crafted paragraph detailing one specific moment of realization can successfully bridge that gap. Think about a moment where the author heard the song unexpectedly playing in a grocery store a year later and realized they didn't cry.
Oh, that's good. That specific, tangible moment of realization is infinitely stronger than a sweeping summary of time passing.
Right. It anchors the healing in a real-world experience, just like the lyrics anchored the initial pain.
Okay, so we've built a strong emotional core, and we've ensured the reader gets a satisfying resolution. But now that those elements are strengthened, we need to pivot to how the author initially invites the reader into this newly refined narrative. Refining the opening to establish a clear, unified focus will immediately hook the reader and set the appropriate tone for the rest of the reflection.
Yes, the entry point. The weakness here is that the very first sentence is convoluted and really lacks focus. It starts by stating the song helps people in love, then adds a parenthetical caveat suggesting it's probably talking to a specific woman to do this with a specific someone.
It's a lot to take in all at once.
It is. And then it finally concludes that it's actually excellent for everyone. This meandering opening completely dilutes the impact of the deeply personal, raw story that follows. When you start an intimate reflection with a broad debate about who the songwriter was originally addressing, you're building a barrier between the reader and your core message.
Right. It creates immediate cognitive overload. But let me play devil's advocate for just a second. I can see what you're going for here. But could one argue that a slightly messy stream of consciousness opening actually reflects the messy, confusing nature of the emotions the author was experiencing at the time?
Oh, that is an incredibly common instinct, especially for writers dealing with chaotic subject matter like grief or mental health struggles. But we have to strictly distinguish between depicting confusion and actively confusing the reader.
Okay, tell me more about that distinction. Where exactly is the line?
Well, if you want to show the reader that your mind was chaotic, you do that through sharp, crystal-clear descriptions of that chaos. You write a perfectly legible, highly focused sentence about feeling completely lost. When the opening sentence itself trips over its own caveats, the reader doesn't feel your emotional pain. They just feel frustration with the text.
The medium shouldn't be as messy as the message.
Exactly. Parentheticals in an opening sentence inherently pause momentum, and you need momentum to pull a reader into a story.
So the suggestion to correct this weakness is to drastically streamline the introduction. The author should focus immediately on either the universal truth of the song or the intensely personal stakes of their own life, completely dropping the confusing, speculative caveats about who the original songwriter was addressing.
You have to clear the brush away from the front door. You only get get one chance to make a first impression, and it needs to be an invitation, not an obstacle course. If you make a reader work too hard to understand your premise in the first 10 seconds, they will simply leave.
Let's talk about some concrete examples of how to execute this streamlined approach. If the author wants to maintain a broad, philosophical scope at the beginning, they could start purely with the universal theme. Something clean, like, while Listen to Your Heart sounds like a plea to a specific lover, its true power lies in its universal ability to guide anyone through the darkness.
Yeah, that's great. It perfectly acknowledges the song's premise, but immediately pivots to the core theme. It tells the reader exactly what kind of journey they are embarking on without getting bogged down in historical foot.
Or alternatively, we could bypass the general audience entirely and start with the personal. Something highly direct, like, during my darkest emotional period, the DHT melody of Listen to Your Heart became the only voice I could listen to.
I often prefer that approach for personal essays. It's undeniably powerful. You are instantly in the room with the author, are no parentheses, no debating about specific women or specific someones.
It's just the raw truth of the writer's experience delivered with total confidence.
Right. Either the universal or the personal approach works beautifully. The only rule is that you must commit to a single, unified lane. Don't try to merge the universal, the speculative, and the personal all into the first 15 words of the piece. Choosing one of those clear lanes ensures that by the time the reader reaches that beautiful lyrical integration we discussed earlier, they are already fully invested.
Well, that covers our main points for today. Let's clearly summarize the actionable takeaways we've laid out. First, weave specific lines from the song lyrics directly into the personal anecdotes to ground the emotion and bridge the gap between the universal song and the personal experience.
And second, expand on the years of healing to complete the narrative arc. Fill that missing third act so the reader understands the why and how of the recovery.
And finally, strip the opening sentence of its meandering, confusing caveats to create a stronger, unified hook, focusing immediately on either the universal theme or the personal stakes.
Applying these structural shifts will lock the reader into the emotional journey from the very first sentence.
We warmly invite the author to apply these changes to their draft and submit the revised reflection back into the show for another critique. We are always eager to see how a writer continues to grow. Keep writing, keep refining, and we'll see you on the next critique.